You are now listening to the Unscripted Ohio podcast, brought to you by Buckeye Grove and in part by JFQ Lending. All your home purchase and refinance needs should be handled by a Buckeye. You'll never pay for your appraisal with these guys. Licensed in 33 states and more on the way. Check them out at jfqlending.com. For the latest news, notes, analysis, and discussion, check us out on buckeyegrove.com and follow us on Twitter at UnscriptedOhio1. Now, broadcasting from Podcast Central, a place that is not his mother's basement.
Hey, Ma! Can we get some meatloaf?
We promise. Here's your host, Kyle Lamb.
Hey, Ma! The meatloaf!
Monday. That is when Ryan Day is going to announce Ohio State's starting quarterback for game number 1 of the 2019 Ohio State football season. Spoiler alert, it's going to be Justin Fields. I hope that bit of information does not ruin our friendship. I hope that you will not think any less of me. But folks, Justin Fields is going to win the quarterback job. I don't think there's many of you out there thinking otherwise. I don't think too many of you are losing sleep. But I hope this spoiler does not ruin the rest of your weekend, because it's going to be Fields. Just FYI, it's going to be him. There was never really a competition, and for the record, I also don't believe that a lack of black stripe removed for Gunnar Hoke has anything to do with the quarterback battle. I'll get into that here in a little bit. I am your host, Kyle Lamb, of the Unscripted Ohio podcast. I hope that the Ohio State University attorneys don't come after me for saying but we are Unscripted Ohio. I am your host, Kyle Lamb. We are brought to you by the BuckeyeGrove.com, as well as sponsorship in part from our title sponsor, the JFQ Lending. All of your mortgage and refinance needs should be handled by a Buckeye, so please check them out at jfqlending.com. With, of course, support from the Go Bus. Go Bus has over 40 stops across Ohio with popular destinations like Hocking Hills, Mohican State Park, and many of Ohio's big cities. Check them out at ridegobus.com or give them a call, 1-888-95-GO-BUS. So, yes, the Ohio State quarterbacking mystery will be finalized, announced on Monday. It's not a mystery. None of you should have been waiting in suspense. Some of you were. A few of you, not many, but some. We will talk about that here in a second. Tate Martell got some bad news this week. We'll talk about him and his situation at Miami. Bill Bender of the Sporting News, one of the show favorites, been on with the show with me for a year and a half, 2 years now. He's going to be coming on. We'll talk some Ohio State football and college football in general as we preview the 2019 season, and a big commitment for Ohio State basketball that I'll get into later in the show. Yes, so this is going to be announced on Monday. Justin Fields will be your starter. Look, I'm not going to spend time talking about this. It's not a mystery. Ohio State has a way, and this has always been the case with every single coach. It's probably been a little bit more so the case with Urban Meyer. And I think Ryan Day is going to continue some of the tradition, some of the handling of the program and the way he deals with things in public. I think some of the psychology that Urban employed at Ohio State is going to carry over to the Ryan Day era. And look, this has all been about Ryan Day trying to convince Justin Fields and Gunnar Hoke that this is a competition, that these two, either one of them can win the job. And that's the way it should be. Ohio State, a place like Ohio State, and this goes for any program, but especially Ohio State when you have a lot of 4- and 5-star talent, you need guys competing for every position. Even if it's a foregone conclusion that a 5-star talent like Justin Fields is going to win the job, it would be crazy not to make sure that both parties or all parties in a position battle are working as hard every day they can to try to win the job, thinking that they have a legitimate chance. And that's what all Ryan Day has done here. And I know some people have answered, well, if this were a legitimate battle, Gunnar Hoke would have lost his stripe by now. Okay, look, I'm not trying to convince you it's a legitimate battle, because I just got done telling you I think that this was a foregone conclusion. I really do think that. I don't think that there was a scenario, barring injury, where Fields probably wouldn't have won the job. But black stripes, you guys, I love you to death, but don't read anything into Black Stripes. This is all about personal motivation. It doesn't tell us anything about relative competition. All these coaches are trying to do is find ways to motivate and reward players for good performance or good attitude. Some of these guys get Black Stripes removed just for good attitude. It's not always about performance. Sometimes it's just about setting an example and being a good leader and having the qualities that define a good Ohio State football player. There have been guys in the past that have gotten, stripes removed just for a good practice, for one single good performance, and they would, remove a stripe because they wanted to motivate that player and get them an extra to start being more consistent. And then there are other guys that performed maybe as good as or well as anyone in fall practice, but didn't get their stripe removed until the very end. Okay, it's a singular basis. There's not a single criteria that fits all. It's not one size fits all. And so these Black Stripes, you can't look at them that they have anything to do with, if this guy did get his Black Stripe removed and the next guy didn't, so that therefore he's clearly on ahead on the depth chart. It just doesn't work that way. That's not what these Black Stripes are used for. So the Justin Fields thing, look, I don't think it's much of a competition. He's going to win the job on Monday. It'll be announced. It'll be official. We can go on looking toward August 31st in Florida Atlantic like we expected Justin Fields to be the starter all along, and that's going to be the case. All I'm saying is, although this particular instance, I don't think it was a close competition. I think Fields, reportedly has been pretty good most of practice. He's had his ups and downs, but I think he's been pretty good. He's going to win the job, but it has nothing to do with Gunnar Hoke's lack of Black Stripe being removed. I think even if it were close, Gunnar Hoke could potentially not have gotten his stripe removed, and we wouldn't know any different. So, look, that's going to be decided. I think for Ohio State, as we get closer, I can't help but think. I look more and more at this roster, and it's going to come down to the consistency of Justin Fields as a passer on offense, and maybe the offensive line. Can the offensive line protect Fields like they did protect Haskins at the end of last year? The running game is going to have to bounce back. J.K. Dobbins, we talked about it with Alex last week. They have to be more consistent in the running game. Dobbins has to be an explosive back. They need Marcus Crowley, who I'm very high on. You know that. They need him to step up, or Master Teague be healthy and step up. Somebody's going to have to do it. DeMario McCall, this is his chance to be a big-time back, okay? He can be not just a third down back, but he can be a second and first down back occasionally and share some of the snaps if he can be healthy, number one, and he's going to have to hold on to the ball, number two. So I think the offensive line in the running game is a bit of a question mark, especially, but it's going to come down to Justin Fields ultimately. And on the defensive side of the ball, the linebacking core. I really like where the defensive backfield is at. And the defensive line, the interior line, I mean, there's legitimately 6, maybe 7 guys that I think can be in that rotation. The interior defensive line is going to be a monster for Ohio State. Not just, maybe the top couple guys I don't think are going to be as good as we've seen in the past at Ohio State, but I think the depth is as good inside as we've seen it, potentially. There's a lot of guys, Tugiai, Haskell Garrett, just Devon Hamilton. There's so many guys that can step up and be terrors and disruptive forces in the inside. Of course, Chase Young on the outside. The defensive ends maybe are as deep, but we know the defensive ends are really good too. So DBs, DEs, DTs, I think all those are going to be really good. It's going to be up to the linebacking core. Can Tuff Borland and or Taraja Mitchell step up inside? Will Malik Harrison turn in the big senior season? And the other side, Baron Browning has gotten some praise. Pete Warner, can he be better? Come down to linebackers and quarterbacks. I think that's where your Ohio State season is going to be at. It's going to make or break a 2 or 3 loss season versus maybe 1 loss or running the table in the regular season and getting to the playoffs. So down in Miami, Coral Gables, before we get to Bill Bender, Tate Martell got some bad news. He did not win the starting quarterback job. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this, but just a couple thoughts I want to wrap this story up because it looks like there's a report out there. He may actually be converted over to wide receiver, which I think is good for his talents. I said all along, I was surprised at the number of people that just assumed he would go down to Miami and win the job over Jaron Williams, who got named the starter. Williams was a true freshman last year. Remember, he got an official visit to both Ohio State and Alabama, and both schools really liked him a lot. He's talented. I'm not saying he's a 5-star can't miss kind of guy, because he's not. And he didn't look all that great in limited time last year. Got redshirted, but he is a redshirt freshman this year. They really liked him still. They hadn't given up on him. So many people were just assuming that Martell was going to go down there and start automatically. I just never saw it. Williams is younger, arguably just as talented, maybe more talented. I just didn't think Martell. Remember, he's not a true passer yet. He's had consistency issues of his own. I'm not surprised by this result. Some people are. Apparently that the day of the announcement when Tate or Jaron Williams got announced as the starting quarterback, Tate didn't show up. That's just. I'm not going to pile on for the kid. He was disappointed. I get it, but that's one of the many reasons why he left Ohio State in the first place. It's little things like that. Remember, he almost left Ohio State 4 or 5 times. It wasn't just once. It was 4 or 5 times. And if he is sticking it out with Miami and he's going to give another position to go, I applaud him for that. I'm not sure that there's a lot of other options. Transferring is not really a good thing because he would have to sit out this year. He's not going to get a waiver a second time. But I applaud him anyway if he's sticking it out and trying another position. I'm just not very surprised by this. Unfortunately for Ohio State fans that wanted to see Tate Martell, doesn't look like they're going to get much of a chance. Remember, Miami is not going to give up on Williams very easily. A redshirt freshman, talented. They've got offensive line issues down there in Coral Gables. And for that reason, that's one of many reasons why they're not going to give up on Williams quickly. I think they're going to give him at least 4 or 5 games before even if it goes really poorly, 4 or 5 games before they would think about benching him. I don't think it's going to be something, one game after the Florida game, if it's a disaster, they're not going to turn to Tate Martell. It's just not going to work that way. So Tate Martell will not be the starting quarterback, at least to start the year for Miami. He reportedly may or may not be a wide receiver when all is said and done. We'll keep an eye on that. But, hey, let's turn our attention now to our 2019 college football preview with Sporting News' Bill Bender. All right, we are back now with Bill Bender of the Sporting News. We're going to talk some college football and preview the college football season. Bill, how you been, man? It's that time of year. I know you're pumped and ready to go.
Oh, yeah, Kyle. Thanks for having me on. And as always, it is that time of year. I've been telling people all week, I'm kind of sick of talking about the off season. I'm ready to get some games going, get these season predictions going, find out if we're right. But, when we get to the point when we're arguing about whether or not Kelly Bryant got a ring or whether or not Ohio State should use I think it's time to play some football.
There are some interesting picks this year. I feel like there are some teams being overlooked a little bit. One of them here, that listeners on this show are familiar with, but then there are also some interesting trendy picks. I want to start by looking conference by conference as we circle around, and then we'll get around to the Big Ten and Ohio State here towards the end. But let's start with the ACC. Instead of asking you who your favorite is to win the league, because I think we all have the same favorite, I'm going to ask you, with the caveat knowing that it just takes one game and one win for somebody other than Clemson to win the ACC. Is there anybody realistically that you think could upend Clemson in the ACC race this year?
Syracuse are bust in a lot of ways because Syracuse catches them early, catches them at home, has played in some big games with Dino, has a system that's given Clemson some amount of trouble. And if they win, then, they have to lose 2. So I think that's the only scenario where Clemson doesn't win the ACC. Any one of those teams on their schedule could beat them once. They're just really hard to see them losing 2 games. So if they turn the corner in September, beat Georgia Tech, Texas A&M, and Syracuse, I hate to put it this way in August, but you could almost pencil them in for a playoff berth.
That's kind of where I'm at because, let's say, Syracuse does beat Clemson head-to-head in their one meeting. Even if that happens, I'm not so sure that, I can expect Syracuse to run the table in the rest of the games. Like, I'm not there yet. I mean, they have a really good offense, obviously. But even if they beat Clemson head-to-head, I'm still not sure I trust them to not lose more than once or twice the rest of the year.
Right. I still, and I think on the flip side of it, if they do lose, their schedule's weak enough that they could probably make a run to a New Year's Day Six Bowl for the ACC, and people will be wondering why is Syracuse in this game, but they have that capability. But to your point, yeah, I think that's the thing with the ACC. You can't really spot a team that you think is truly capable of challenging Clemson the full year and not just one night. The Coastal Virginia is the seventh different team, could be the seventh different team to win the division in 7 years. And they are picked to win the division this year. They're the only team that hasn't done it. So we can try to defend the conference, and some of the coaches did when I was down there for ACC kickoff. I just think there is the era of Clemson and everybody else is truly like it was with Florida State and everybody else in the 1990s.
And what do you make of that Virginia team? They, at least on paper, have a good defense, but the fact that we are talking about Virginia winning the Coastal, it strikes me as, the Coastal really is in a bad way right now. And, again, Virginia could go play Clemson in the championship and win in one single game, but man, I mean, it looks like a weak division to me.
Yeah, I mean, they've got a very good quarterback in Bryce Perkins that it's one of those like lottery ticket Heisman candidates to me, because I know he's going to have the stats, and that award is based on stats all the time. And, if he leads them to that division title, beats Virginia Tech, which they haven't done in 15 years, and leads them to Charlotte, he might get some votes, much like Lamar Jackson did a few years ago when it comes out of nowhere. So file that name away. But I don't think they're good enough to, get through the ACC grind and not lose 3 or 4 games to get to Charlotte. And then again, once Clemson gets to Charlotte, they just put their foot down. It's kind of like, in some ways, Ohio State when they get to Indy. They pretty much put their foot down more often than not.
So I want to shift to the SEC. The West, obviously, it's Alabama until proven otherwise. I mean, there are some other teams in there. LSU is going to have lofty expectations as usual, and Texas A&M. But in the East, it's really interesting because there are some people that think Florida is the team to beat. Georgia did get a majority of the votes there as a preseason favorite. But the Bulldogs do have some losses that they have to worry about in that, they've got a very, very young receiving core. They're replacing a couple of good backs the last couple of years. Can Florida or somebody else sneak up and nip Georgia in that East Division?
I think Florida or bust there too, because I don't think anybody has enough talent to really beat Georgia. If you look at their scores, they haven't lost a game within the division the last 2 years, and it's kind of like Clemson in some ways, that the scores aren't getting better, they're getting worse. I went down to the Kentucky game last year, and remember Kentucky was like the big challenger, and it wasn't even close. So I think Florida could, if they get continued development out of Felipe Franks. We're going to see them here in like 10 days. And they have done a good job with recruiting with Dan, and he adds a little bit to that. If you want to make the comparison to the Ohio State-Michigan rivalry, Dan Mullen's not afraid to talk and not afraid to throw some jabs. And I think it's actually good for that rivalry, because if I had to bet on which game was going to be probably the hottest game in the country over the next 3 to 5 years, it'll probably be Florida-Georgia.
Yeah, and it's interesting. That's going to be a must-see game this year for sure. It's really kind of surprising to me that we're still talking about a lack of depth in the East. 10 years ago when Urban was at Florida, I mean, the East was still pretty good, especially the first half. But even from top to bottom, it was really competitive. But it just, I know these things are cyclical normally, but we're still talking 10 years later. The East Division, the depth has just not improved there.
No, it doesn't help that Tennessee's not good, or that South Carolina, they were good with Spurrier, because, and a big reason why was they were able to get 4- and 5-star talent from South Carolina, not to go elsewhere. Jadeveon Clowney being the biggest name there, and I was covering high school ball down there, and it was good. When you're talking about Kentucky and Vandy being good and Missouri being a sleeper, that probably tells you more about Tennessee and South Carolina than anything else.
So in the West, it's probably an Alabama-LSU race. The quarterback play for LSU under Joe Burrow has improved. That's been their big Achilles heel the last several years. But is it enough to get them over the hump and beat Bama this year?
We'll see. I love Joe. I love the work he's done down there. Anytime Ohio Miss football's playing, I'm going to root for him. But they weren't able to move the ball against Alabama last year. They got to go to Tuscaloosa. I know they hired a new passing game coordinator from the Saints, and that's expected to be one of these things to help close the gap. And I will say that Ed Orgeron's done a nice job of kind of changing the vibe in Baton Rouge, but I still don't think it's enough to catch Alabama. And in fact, if I was looking at a team that I think could challenge them within the division, it's not Auburn. Auburn can catch them every once in a while, Jordan Hare, but they're not consistent enough to be that challenger. I think it's A&M. I think A&M's got the recruiting. I think Jimbo knows how to recruit. They've played a lot of tough games. They played Clemson tough last year, and Kellen Mond's a pretty talented quarterback, and they got some receivers on the way. So it might not happen this year, but I think A&M's going to emerge as maybe that team that pushes Nick Saban down the home stretch in his career.
I got to tell you, Bill, I saw, Alabama will be going to Texas A&M the week before Auburn next year in the 2020 season. I am so disappointed that game couldn't take place this year in that current slot, because that would be a heck of a lot of fun to see Alabama this year going to Texas A&M that second to last week of the regular season.
Yeah, A&M's getting closer. They're not there yet, but Jimbo has a lot of confidence, and Texas A&M have kind of started an arm race where it's going to be a little bit harder for Ohio State and LSU and Oklahoma to go in there and get their guys. I'm saying that knowing Garrett Wilson's in a Buckeye uniform. I'm just saying that those two teams are doing a lot better in their home state, and there is a lot to choose from in that home state. So that's why I think A&M, if they combine the recruiting that he had in Texas and put some Florida kids on top of it, Jimbo's going to do all right.
I don't know about you, but I'm really interested in this Big 12 race. I know Oklahoma is the presumptive favorite here. I'm a little more on the fence about them. They kind of their defense was good, but not great last year. It kind of got carried by a otherworldly offense. I'm on the fence about Jalen Hurts, and to be fair, I was on the fence going into the season last year about Kyler Murray, so maybe my opinion should be taken with a grain of salt here. But I really like this race, and that Texas could sneak up. I think Iowa State and TCU are both interesting dark horses. I think this could be a really fun Big 12 race.
Yeah, I like where Iowa State and TCU maybe could challenge, but to me it's Texas and Oklahoma again. We'll probably see it twice. I like Texas a little more than Oklahoma, too. I think with Ellinger coming back, the big game experience they got last year, a little bit of depth of recruiting on the defensive side of the ball, and that LSU-Texas game will be a tone setter for everybody. I know everybody's jumping on it. We can get into it. We will get into it here in a little bit, but when we do playoff picks. But, I don't think Jalen's going to do a bad job in that offense. I'm going to trust the quarterback that's been there, that beat Oklahoma last year, and I kind of like Texas.
So in the Pac-12, Utah, another of those trendy playoff picks, picked to win the South Division here this year, and Oregon picked to win the North. Utah got the most votes to win the Pac-12 title. I really like Oregon here, but I think you're a pretty big Utah guy as well. I'm curious what you think about this race.
Yeah, they've got the schedule. Utah's probably the best team in an inconsistent Pac-12 South. You're looking for a deep sleeper. I think Arizona State might be all right. And then on the other side, it's Washington and Oregon. I think Oregon, obviously, the Ducks, they've got a huge game, a huge statement game for the entire conference in that first game against Auburn. It could validate Justin Herbert's decision to return to school. It could loft that conference, score a big win at Jerry World. And I think Washington, we say all this stuff about Utah, Oregon, Arizona State, and then we'll watch Washington win it again because that's what Chris Peterson does. I feel like they'll be right in the mix with what they have coming back, and it's more about the system than anything else.
Yeah, last year, Herbert, to me, when I watched Oregon games, I kept coming away thinking this is all pro potential hype, but I'm not actually seeing it translate consistently on the field. He had a very low completion percentage, kind of erratic at times. It will be interesting to see him and whether he develops and puts all that potential together as a college senior this year.
Oh, yeah. This is a big year for him. There's a lot of people that think he would have been a first-round pick last year and may have been taken over some of the quarterbacks that were taken in last year's draft. But, yeah, I do. It'll be interesting. I think his completion percentage will have to be better in that offense. They can use the weapons they have around them. They have a good running game. The one thing Mario Cristobal did do was he kept some pretty elite recruits on the West Coast. So they're doing okay there. But again, to me, I mean, we could talk about kickoff times. We could talk about USC. We can kick up the Urban to USC rumor if you want. I'm not there. At the end of the day, that conference has to win big-time football games. They have to beat Auburn. They have to do well in their bowls. Washington's fallen on their face a few times in the New Year's Day 6. USC's lousy right now. Oregon hasn't really been on the national stage since Ohio State beat them the first year of the playoffs. So I think that's what has to happen more than anything if you want to improve the reputation of your conference.
Yeah, don't get me started on the kickoff times. That's a discussion we could we could have a field day with that. So I want to circle around now to the Big Ten. Michigan was picked by the Cleveland Plain Dealer poll to win the East Division in the Big Ten, and I personally don't have a problem with that. I don't agree with it, but I think you can make a case with Shea Patterson back, and I think a really, really good receiving corps potentially. I mean, a lot of that will depend on the health of Tariq Black and the production of Donovan Peoples-Jones, but I like Nico Collins a lot. So, Bill, I'm not criticizing this pick of Michigan, but it just feels like, especially with all the talent and, not even reminding people of the 7 straight wins by Ohio State, I feel like Ohio State is being slept on again, and people rushing to put Michigan there in the top of that division.
Well, we picked Ohio State at Sporting News. We went with a more conservative title game pick. We went with Ohio State and Wisconsin. And to be honest with you, I'm less confident in Wisconsin because of the crossover schedule against Michigan and Ohio State. And then I think they have Michigan State in there too. But, if you talk about real quick, I mean, if you talk about the Big Ten West, you're throwing 6 darts at the wall.
Yeah.
I could make a case for any one of those 6 teams. When you get into the Big Ten East, it will be either Ohio State or Michigan. I think Penn State and Michigan State will be okay, but I don't see either one of them going to Indianapolis. And then when you break that down, to me, it's Michigan's got to prove it on the field. I do think their offense will be pretty good if they're true to what Josh Gaddis says he's going to do. And then Ohio State, it's like their offense is a question mark. And to me, Ohio State's defense, I mean, we're hearing the right things now. Of course we are, with Hafley and Madison running the defense and the back 7 looking to improve. And we know they got a great defensive line, but we need to see it. So I think that's the big question. Are they going to play another track meet in Ann Arbor, or which school makes the big adjustment that allows them to win the Big Ten championship?
You mentioned the horse race there in the West. That's the wide open West. Do you think Wisconsin is going to pull the trigger on starting Graham Mertz, the true freshman, right out of the gate?
I don't know if they'll do it out of the gate, but I think they'll be pushed to do it at some point. And maybe that's why when I look at the Big Ten race a little bit differently than just saying, here's what's going to happen, exact records. I kind of, that race is going to turn off each big game. Like, for example, Michigan-Wisconsin's a big game for both schools. You never know where the loser is going to go from there. Last year, Wisconsin went in the tank after they lost. Nebraska-Ohio State, somebody's going to go really trend in the right direction after that one, especially if the Huskers are undefeated when Ohio State gets there. Michigan State's always that game. And the fact that Ohio State doesn't really play one of those season-altering games after Nebraska until the last 2, I mean, they're a pretty good bet to me. They're set up to go 10-0 or 9-1 at the least when they hit those last 2 games.
Bill, I think you said it best with this Ohio State team. We're seeing and hearing all the right things, defensively, but they still got to go prove it. It seems to me like, on a confidence scale, what would you expect from each unit? I think the defensive backs, there's a really good chance that they're going to be really good. I think the defensive line, especially on the interior, is going to be extremely deep for Ohio State. It really just seems like how much improvement do we see from the linebacking core is going to determine whether that Ohio State team lives up to expectations or not and improves that defensive unit as a whole.
Well, they got Malik Harrison. He's a player, and he's an NFL player that's going to do well at the next level. I think, to me, it's not – none of that is as big a question to me as the thing with – and we always talk about 7-0 with Urban Meyer, and we will forever because that's what he did in that rivalry game. But to me, I mean, the fact that I looked this up, put it in our preview, he was 17-2 against ranked Big Ten teams. And that was losing to Michigan State twice. And to me, that's where Ryan Day is going to have to prove it right away. I mean, I mentioned the Nebraska game. That's going to be a ranked team probably. When you go to Evanston, it might be a ranked team. When they play Northwestern, it might not. But, I mean, Penn State probably ranked. Michigan State probably ranked. Michigan probably ranked. How does he do against those ranked Big Ten teams as it accumulates? I mean, Urban was just – I think the other stat – I know you know this one better than I do. I think they lost one Big Ten game at home in 7 seasons, if I'm not mistaken. And that was that Michigan State game where they lost on a field goal.
I'll throw another one at you, Bill. Not just 17-2 in the Big Ten, but all time, his whole entire career, he won 85% of his games against ranked teams. Good luck finding a coach that does that. Even Nick Saban, I looked this up. Nick Saban was like at 68%, which is really, really good. But I know at Alabama it was actually more like 85%. But for his entire career, it's like 66 or 68%. So 85% games won against ranked teams in his entire career. That's really tough to replicate.
And that's where I think that's the biggest challenge for Day. It's not recruiting. They've recruited awesome this summer. It's not how he handles the media. I've been over there a few times, and I mean, Ryan's got a different disposition than Urban does. Urban's more of the old school coach that I was used to actually playing for when I was in high school. I played for one that coaches at Dublin Kaufman now, and that kind of old school feel, and there's nothing wrong with it, but there's nothing kind of in that group like the Matt Campbells and Lincoln Rileys and that next gen of, Scott Satterfield. I would lump him in there. I talked to him last week, and these are those new up-and-coming coaches trying to make their mark, and Lincoln Riley certainly has. I mean, Lincoln Riley, I was talking to I don't want to give the person credit because I'm trying to think of who I was talking to about this. And with Ryan Day, it's not a threat of will he succeed at Ohio State. I think he can wake up and win 10 games there a year. I guess the threat, and it's the same one with Lincoln Riley, is if the Kingsbury thing pans out in the NFL, guys like Ryan Day and Lincoln Riley are really going to be pressured to go to the NFL.
So I want to wrap this up. We'll go over playoff picks here. So, Bill, I want you to give me your four playoff picks as you see it at the end of the year, and give me one under-the-radar team. And I think I know who you're going to pick because we talked about it on Twitter a few weeks ago. But for the listeners that don't know, give me your 4 picks as you would see them today, and then your under-the-radar team.
Yeah, the playoff we have picked at Sporting News is Clemson versus Texas in the Fiesta Bowl and Alabama versus Ohio State in the Chick-fil-A Bowl. And I think if you want to sub Georgia in for either Ohio State, Texas, go ahead. But I just think it's increasingly hard for me personally to project 2 teams from the same conference in a 14 format because I think a special exception has to be made. And to me, that would mean that Georgia and Alabama were both undefeated. When we did that Sleepers article, Utah is interesting because they have the schedule. They have, they could be that team out of the Pac-12 that everybody hates. And, if you're let's say Ohio State or Texas is sitting there and they're probably rooting against Utah late in the season, that could happen. Because I think here's my problem with the playoff setup. My biggest issue right now is Big Ten plays 9, the SEC and the ACC play 8. And the SEC and the ACC haven't missed the playoff. The Big Ten, since going to 9, has had a team that was probably worthy of getting in. And you and I don't have to rehash the Oklahoma-Ohio State or Alabama-Ohio State argument, but I think playing 9 makes it increasingly hard for you to get into the college football playoff.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree completely. And that's why I have, in part, even though they do play 9 games, I have Utah just because of the strength of schedule and the way their schedule breaks. I think they have an easier path. I tend to like Nebraska's ceiling a little bit more. I know you like Auburn's ceiling. Auburn has, more talent than either of those 2 teams, but we never know what Auburn we're getting. So I'm going to go my same 4 teams that you guys had at the Sporting News. I'm going to go Ohio State, Texas, Alabama, and Clemson. Not necessarily in that order, of course, but those are the 4 teams that I would take today, and I'm going to go Utah as my sleeper pick for the playoff.
I like it. And, I think if you're looking for like the first 4 out type deal, I think Georgia's one of those teams. I think if Michigan gets over the hump, they could be one of those teams. I mean, they could easily get to Ohio State 10-1 again. Texas, Oklahoma, winner, loser, those teams. And then, to me, Notre Dame's I don't know if it's there this year because I think they're going to have a tough time winning at Georgia. They got to go to Michigan. They got to go to Stanford. They're going to have a tough time getting through that schedule.
Yeah, it's that is a really tough schedule. It is interesting that for the first time under Brian Kelly, a quarterback is a captain this year. So I don't know what we should make of that. Whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. But I did think that was an interesting anecdote. Yeah,
absolutely. I think Brian Kelly. He trusts Ian Book. Ian Book had a good season last year, and then they're going to have a tough schedule though. And again, with all those road trips, and I think Notre Dame. They'll get in when they go undefeated. It's a little bit tougher for them to get in when they go 11-1.
We're about 2 weeks away from the start of college football. Bill, I know you're excited. It's been a pleasure as always. Looking forward to it.
Hey, no problem. Thanks for having me on, Kyle.
Bill Bender, check him out on the Sporting News, covers college football among many other things. Catch him out on Twitter at BillBender92.
Stretch runtime here at Unscripted Ohio. Kick up your feet as we cross the finish line with the Buckeye Beat. The latest in Ohio State news and notes.
Kick the tires and light the fires, Big Daddy.
Great news for Ohio State basketball. Another commitment. 2021 point guard Michi Johnson out of Cleveland, Ohio, Garfield Heights High School. He was high school teammates last year, 2 years ago actually, with Alonzo Gaffney before Gaffney transferred to a prep school. This is a big-time commitment. Right now he is number 94 in the country in the Rivals 150 2021 rankings, but he is almost assuredly to jump up. You'll probably see him a borderline top 50 type of player when all is said and done, but this is a big get for Ohio State. He joins Kalen Etzler, a 6'8 forward out of Convoy, Crestview High School, Convoy, Ohio. Kalen, of course, is the nephew of former Ohio State player Doug Etzler. So 2 commitments for Ohio State in the 2021 class. Now they're looking for a couple guys in the 2020 class up ahead of them. They'll probably, as of right now, they would take 2 guys. They've got Moses Moody, a top 50 wing forward, coming in for an official visit here later this fall. So Ohio State basketball, Chris Holtmann and his staff getting things done still. Of course, Mike Schrage is now the head coach down at Elon, but he has been replaced by Jake Diebler, and they haven't skipped a beat yet. So Ohio State basketball still getting in some really good talent. If they can get a couple guys for that 2020 class, the next several years of Ohio State basketball are going to be loaded. So that's going to do it for the show today. Reminder that we have got, we'll be back on Monday with our normal Monday, Friday routine, and Wednesday will be the Scarlet and Grape podcast. And then the week after, previewing Ohio State football, we'll go to Monday, Wednesday, Friday with Scarlet and Grape coming up on Tuesday and Thursday. You can catch the Unscripted Ohio podcast on Buckeye Grove every Monday, Wednesday, Friday going forward. And the Scarlet and Grape podcast, along with Unscripted Ohio, the Unscripted Ohio podcast, will be on SoundCloud, Google Play, iTunes, Stitcher, and Spotify. Catch me on Twitter at KYLam8. That's going to do it for me. Hope you enjoy your weekend. Even though the quarterback position battle has been spoiled, I hope you still enjoy it nonetheless. Come back and hear me on Monday. Have a great weekend, everybody.
You can get new episodes of Unscripted Ohio on Mondays and Fridays exclusively at BuckeyeGrove.com or anytime on SoundCloud, iTunes, Google Play, or Stitcher. Be sure to subscribe to stay up to date on all things Ohio State.